Κυρίες και κύριοι, γεια σας. Θα παρακολουθήσετε την εκπομπή «Δρόμοι της Ανάπτυξης» που σας προσφέρει κάθε εβδομάδα η Ελληνική Εταιρεία Διοίκησης Επιχειρήσεων σε συνεργασία με το οικονομικό τηλεοπτικό κανάλι SBC. Σήμερα το θέμα που θα συζητήσουμε με έναν εκλεκτό καλεσμένο είναι αυτό του ρόλου των ηγετικών στελεχών στην οικονομική ανάπτυξη και ιδιαίτερα στην Ελλάδα, όπου η χώρα έχει απόλυτη ανάγκη να απογειωθεί μέσα από μια νέα επιχειρηματικότητα. Αφορμή για αυτήν την εκπομπή έδωσε η μεγάλη έρευνα που διεξάγεται παγκοσμίως από τον οργανισμό The Conference Board και από την Ελληνική Εταιρεία Διοίκησης Επιχειρήσεων σχετικά με τις προσδοκίες και τις συμπεριφορές των ανώτατων ηγετικών στελεχών επιχειρήσεων μπροστά στις μελλοντικές εξελίξεις. Τα θέματα αυτά παρουσιάστηκαν σε μια ειδική εκδήλωση που διοργάνωσε προσφάτως η Ελληνική Εταιρεία Διοίκησης Επιχειρήσεων και στο πλαίσιο της εκδήλωσης αυτής την μελέτη έρευνα παρουσίασε ο αντιπρόεδρος του The Conference Board, ο κύριος Van Ark, τον οποίον και έχουμε σήμερα στο στούντιο και τον καλωσορίζω. I will start, Mr. Van Ark, putting the question, what are the functions and the duties of the Conference Board, and what is the importance of this survey that we are doing every year, I think?
Yes, every year. Thank you very much for having me on this program, and it's indeed great to talk about this survey and also a little bit about the Conference Board itself. The Conference Board is a global business research organization. You could say a think tank for the business sector. We're an independent organization, we don't lobby, but we do work on topics that are of interest to the business sector. We started in the United States about 100 years ago. We have our centenary. Yes, we have our centenary next year, in 2016.
That's good.
So we have a long history. And indeed, it started with a number of business executives who really wanted to step back from the daily tensions between business leaders and workers and society and really think about what are the big things that we need to think about. So when we started this conference board, we've always been focused on thought leadership, on topics that are of interest to the business sector. Economics topics, I'm the chief economist of the conference board, but also topics related, for example, to human resources and human capital and corporate leadership issues.
Are you also involved in the internal human relations with the different companies?
Absolutely. It's a company membership organization, but we really engage ourselves very deeply with many functions within the company. I think the conference board really, what is a unique feature of the conference board is that we engage both with the financial function, with the human capital function, with the marketing function in the organization, and we really try to provide what we would call an enterprise-wide perspective on issues of interest to business.
You said that you started 100 years ago. How the conference board became global?
It's a long journey that we made, but around in the 1960s, 1970s, when US companies really started to become multinational companies, we became more and more interested in global issues because that was obviously on their mind as well. So today we have 1,200 companies that are members. 1,200.
How many people is occupied in these companies? More or less.
Most of them are very large companies. About 800 of them are large multinational companies where you really talk about thousands.
So it means that the total working people in these companies are more by 1 or 2 or 3 millions.
Oh yes, I mean, we have large companies like General Electric or Shell, or we also have a fairly large presence though in mid-market companies. So that would be typically companies of maybe 500 employees or sometimes up to 1,000. The mid-market is still very large in the US. But about 30% today, 30% of our companies have their headquarters outside the United States. So
30%.
we have we have an office in Brussels, which is sort of our Europe is our second largest market. We have about 150 companies that are a member in Europe, a few companies here in Greece as well. And we now are growing, of course, as most companies are growing their businesses in Asia. So we have an office in Beijing where we have a research center on China issues. and we have an office in Singapore and in Mumbai to serve our members in Southeast Asia and India.
So how many people is occupied in the conference board?
In total, the conference board employs about 300 employees. About 180 of them are based in the United States, maybe about 200. We have a lot of people on the ground. People engage very closely with our members, so we have them sort of spread around the world, including about 50 people who are heading up our office here in Brussels in Belgium.
So these people is doing the survey, and after that they proceed to the conclusions of the survey.
Correct. The most important product that the conference board provides is engagement with the business executives and our members. So we have a large program that we call our council program, which is a program where business executives in particular functions come together maybe 3 times a year to exchange issues that are on their minds. We also have a conference program in the United States. And really what these councils and conferences do is that they give us thoughts and ideas about what are the topics on their mind, what keeps them awake at night, and what does that mean for our research. Now this survey, the CEO Challenge Survey, is a very important instrument for us to get a clear view of what business leaders, CEOs in this case, have on their mind. What are the issues that sort of keeps them awake at night? And it therefore gives us very important information about what are the topics that we need to talk about to our members, what are the topics that we do need to do research on. So we don't only use it as an engagement tool with our members, we also use it as an intelligence tool in order to understand what businesses really think about today.
Mm-hmm. And what are the conditions to be a member of the conference board?
Well, there are very few conditions. You need to be a business or government organization.
You need to be essentially a multinational company?
No, not necessarily. I think you get most out of our services if you have a global presence, if you have at least an international presence, I would say, because we are so globally focused. But again, I mean, we have many companies who are operating just in their own domestic markets and benefit from our insights on how you deal with human resources, how you deal with issues around innovation or sustainability, how you have to think about all that economic information that comes to you every day and that we try to interpret in order to give business executives a little bit of a handle on how to operate.
I saw that you are giving very big importance to innovation.
Yes.
So do you have any startups as member of the conference board?
We don't have that many really small companies that just start up, but many of our members who are larger companies do work very closely with startups. I mean, the value chain now, of course, has a lot of smaller companies that are very important in the process of innovation. So that is why we do actually spend a lot of time. For example, we have a large conference on innovation every year in the United States. And at that conference, we quite often invite executives from smaller startup companies to share their thoughts about how they innovate and how they produce new products and services, which is very important for large companies to understand.
Do you have any indications how the CEOs are using the information that you are giving to them?
Well, first of all, just the survey itself helps the CEOs to sort of think through what are the important issues on their minds. We basically ask them 3 things actually. We first ask them, here's a list of 10 important challenges, and we can discuss a little bit more what those are. Pick the 5 most important ones. Then when they pick the 5 most important ones, it's an online survey, then they get a screen with a list of strategies and tactics that they can apply to deal with those challenges, and again we ask them to pick the 5 most important ones. And then we ask them a third question, and that question is, we call it hot button issues. It's really, what keeps you awake at night right now? What is an immediate problem that you are addressing? So for example, in the case of Greece, this could be sort of, the current crisis that obviously is on many people's minds.
Yes.
So we ask those kind of very specific questions, and of course there you get a lot more diversity between industries. So CEOs really, in that way, sort of get their own thoughts and ideas about what is important. But at the same time, we also use this as an engagement tool, with our members. In the case of Greece, where we're working with the Hellenic Management Association, where we do have a very deep engagement with their members about what did the CEO say And how do we need, as business executives, in many other functions in the company, have to think about what it means if our CEOs give priority to human capital or to innovation? What does that mean for my specific function? So it's also very important for the discussion among executives within the company.
So you think that the conclusions and the observations of the survey influences the behavior of the CEOs?
Well, we hope so. We certainly think it will help companies to think through what their leaders in general are thinking, but also in the discussions that we have with CEOs, they like to understand how their preferences are related to the average. So, for example, what we do after we've done the survey, we survey about 1,000 CEOs online. After that, we do interviews with maybe 20 or 30 or sometimes 40 CEOs, and we ask them more specifically, what are your challenges relative to these averages, and where do you think the differences occur? Why do you think that some challenges have become more important or less important over time?
And these interviews are communicated among your members?
Yes, we do an annual, so we do the survey every...
And we can find these interviews in your site?
Yes, we do the survey every year in September, October. We publish a report in January, usually just ahead of the World Economic Forum, so that it can be information that can also be used in the discussions in Davos. And we then make the headline results available on our website. There is a report that goes to all our members, also to the partners like the Hellenic Management Association that participated in it. They can also consult all the results. We have some video material on there where there's some interviews and some additional meat on the bones, if you like, when it comes to some of these specific challenges.
I will try to visit it.
Yes, absolutely. You should go to conferenceboard.org.
You mentioned Davos. Are you invited in this big conference?
We do, yes.
As participants?
Yes, in conferences we quite often use these kind of insights. Also when we talk about our other research, so for example in the economics research that I'm heading, when we talk about labor market issues, we quite often use the results from the survey and say, how do CEOs think about human capital challenges and what are their strategies to deal with the labor market issues that come to them?
Do you know if the information that the CEOs obtained by your survey are disseminated within the company?
Yes, in quite a few companies.
To the staff, in general speaking, to the staff?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, several of our large companies now quite often have an intranet website where they share information that is of use to their membership. In a few of our large members, we actually have a specific conference board internet website on which this is posted. In the rollout of the CEO Challenge Survey, we quite often have in-company briefings where we have, 50 or 60 people at a high level in the company around the table to discuss some of those results. So it's a very important, as I said, it has two purposes. It's an intelligence tool for the conference board to do the right research, but there's also an engagement tool with the executives in our member companies.
And also information to the stakeholders, I suppose.
Oh yes, absolutely. Of course, for anybody who is in the area of human capital, who's working in the area of marketing or finance, they have a lot of information that they can then use in discussions with their stakeholders.
So you present the CEO challenges for the year 2015. Can you tell to our viewers what are the main points of this survey?
Of course, because I think that's what the viewers are most interested in. So we surveyed in 2015. This was, by the way, the 15th year that we did the survey. Changed a little bit over the years, but the last few years it was actually fairly consistent, so we can compare over time. In late 2014, for the 2015 survey, we interviewed 943 people around the world, CEOs, presidents, chairmen. The companies are pretty widespread across the world, about 25% of them in Europe, in the US, about 15% of them in Europe.
15%?
15% of the respondents were based in Europe. Actually, 49 respondents came from Greece. That was a very nice result. Yeah. We had about 1/3 of our respondents from Asia and then from some other parts around the world. Also, they represented both large companies with more than $5 billion revenue, but also smaller companies that only have less than 100 million revenue. So they were both represented in this survey. So, and also it was across various sectors, manufacturing, but also the services, also financial services were in there. So it was fairly widely spread. Now,
when we say services, do you include also the maritime services?
I'm sure that there will have been some companies that are in the maritime business.
Because Greece, we are very...
Yeah, I cannot, and actually I do not want to, but also cannot identify the individual responses, obviously, for confidentiality reasons. But we have a nice spread across trade, transportation, services. There are quite a few companies represented in that area as well. So we can be confident that a lot of this is also relevant from a Greek perspective. So what are the most important challenges? That's of course the question that we really want to know. We had 10 important challenges. For a couple of years we now see that human capital,
3 years I see.
For about 3 years now, and actually in 2012, 4 years ago, it was second. But human capital has been a really very important factor. So it's about people, and I think that's very important, because I think, you know, in companies we talk so often about finance and about investments and about technology and innovation, but none of this is going to happen without a very strong, dedicated and engaged workforce. So the fact that CEOs see the workforce as being sort of their most important asset in order to make anything else happen is now very consistent in the results. Now, the next on the list are very important too. The second was innovation, which you already mentioned a little earlier. The third was customer relationships, and the fourth was operational excellence. And I mentioned those together because when we looked in a little bit more detail at the rankings, at the, you know, the intensity of the response rate, when we looked at the strategies that CEOs were talking about, they were very much connecting those four things. So human capital is not a thing on its own. It's not an HR thing anymore. Human capital is now about how you innovate, how you become more efficient, and very importantly, how you engage with your customer. Because I think that's the other very important result from the global results that we saw, but also in Greece, is that customer relationships, which always used to be somewhere in the middle of those 10 challenges, is now actually number 3.
Number 3, yes.
In Greece, it's actually number 1, as we will see in a minute. And that's very important because we were wondering, why is it that customer relationships is becoming so much more important? Shouldn't CEOs always be concerned about their customer? But it turns out that CEOs are much more aware of the fact that the customer is a difficult asset to keep with you. The customer is very critical. The customer can very easily come to you but run away. It's not just about the product and the services, it's about the experience, it's about the brand. And the CEO needs to be out in front, him or herself, to make sure that that relationship with the customer is guaranteed and that everybody in the company is working for the customer rather than for their department or for their boss or for anyone else. So I think that's a very encouraging result. And it's also important to see that in Greece, this is actually the most important challenge, in addition to human capital, which of course is number 2 in the case of Greece.
And I see also that the corporate brand and reputation is in the 5th place ranked, and for this year in the 6th place.
Yeah.
Do you think that the competition of the future will be focused in this brand and reputation and communication in generally?
Yeah, I do think that brand, as I mentioned earlier, is a very important issue around the relationship with the customer. The customer is about experience, and the brand that you have for your phone or for your suit or dress is going to be very important for customers. So you can see that CEOs are thinking now much harder about the brand, and as we all know, brand can be also damaged very easily.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can have a very strong brand and then something bad happens, sometimes a quality issue or a breakup in your value chain so that you can, in your supply chain, so that you cannot deliver, and your brand is going to be very seriously damaged. So again, I think the brand is becoming a much more important part of the story, but I think we'd still like to see it somewhat higher on the list than it currently is.
So, okay, we finished the first part of this interview. We will discuss the second part, the global political and economic risks. And I also, I find it very strange that in the bottom of this survey, trust in business, is in the bottom. Why? But we will discuss in the second.
Sure.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, παρακολουθείτε την εκπομπή «Δρόμοι της Ανάπτυξης» που σας προσφέρει η Ελληνική Εταιρεία Δίκησης Επιχειρήσεων σε συνεργασία με το SBC, το οικονομικό τηλεοπτικό κανάλι. Σήμερα η συζήτηση γίνεται με τον κύριο Βανάρκ, που είναι αντιπρόεδρος του The Conference Board, το οποίο Conference Board συνεργάζεται με την Ελληνική Εταιρεία Δίκησης Επιχειρήσεων στο πλαίσιο μιας παγκόσμιας έρευνας για τις προσδοκίες και τις αναμονές των ηγετικών στελεχών των επιχειρήσεων. Θα κάνουμε ένα σύντομο διαφημιστικό διάλειμμα και θα επανέλθουμε. Κυρίες και κύριοι, θα παρακολουθήσετε το δεύτερο μέρος της εκπομπής «Δρομοι της Ανάπτυξης» που σας προσφέρει κάθε εβδομάδα η Ελληνική Εταιρεία Δίκησης Επιχειρήσεων. Η σημερινή συζήτηση γίνεται με τον κύριο Βανάρκ, που είναι αντιπρόεδρος του οργανισμού The Business Board, ένας οργανισμός ο οποίος σε συνεργασία με την Ελληνική Εταιρεία Δίκησης Επιχειρήσεων κάνει μια παγκόσμια έρευνα για τις συμπεριφορές και τις αναμονές των ηγετικών στελεχών των επιχειρήσεων. Στο πρώτο μέρος συζητήσαμε τις δραστηριότητες αυτού του φορέα και τα βασικά συμπεράσματα που προκύπτουν από την παγκόσμια έρευνα που κάνει και στην οποία απάντησαν για το 2015 945 managers, ηγετικοί managers ανά τον κόσμο. Mr. Van Ark, I see that the global political and economic risk for the survey of this year is in the 8th place. In the year 2013 was in the 5th place, and I find it a little bit strange, because I think that now, this year, the political risks are more or less more important than 3 years ago.
Yes, it's a very good question. I think the first thing that's important to remember is that the survey was done in September, October 2014, when I think the global and also Greek and European business environment and economic environment still looked a little bit more promising than it did since November and December. A lot of things happened. Oil prices came down very rapidly. The euro weakened, which is good for the euro, but it weakened so rapidly that it's worrying a little bit whether, you know, the flight to the US dollar is not kind of a safe haven kind of attitude rather than just a strengthening of the US economy. Of course, we had a lot more quantitative easing, and then, of course, here in Greece, we had an intensification of the political crisis in Greece's relationship with the rest of Europe. So I think, indeed, if you would ask the question today, perhaps, political economic risk would be somewhat higher on the list. But I say perhaps, because it's interesting when you're going to look at what CEOs talk about when it comes around risk. They are aware of risk. They have lived for a pretty risky environment now, and this is true for Greece too, for about 5-6 years. And in a sense, they're getting used to it. They know that the global economy is weak. They know here in Greece that whatever is going to happen, it will be a very challenging period ahead of us. And I think they are beginning to sort of say, what is it that we can do in this slow global environment? And when you look at the strategies, it's really important because they are not very defensive when it comes to risk. Of course, you need contingency plans. You need to do risk management. Of course, you need to. But when you look at the strategies they're talking about, the most important one is to make their companies more agile, more flexible, more able to deal with those challenges, and make them more resilient, which means that you have a greater capacity to absorb these kind of challenges. So I think it's a much more offensive, attacking attitude to the risks and the uncertainties they have.
You said that the global economy is weak, and I'm asking you, as you are an economist, you think that really the global economy is weak, or the global economy is changing?
Well,
and this change, we perceive it as a weakness.
Well, when we look at the hard numbers, which are the growth rates of the global economy, it's
Because
around...
I see the numbers in Asia, for instance, it's not a problem.
Well, but let's face it, I mean, in 2000, between late 90s and before the crisis started in 2008, the growth rates of the global economy were about 4.5%. So the global economy was growing its output by about 4.5% on average per year. Today it's around 3.2, 3.3%.
Yes.
And of course it's been very low in the crisis and it recovered, but it's significantly lower than it was. What part of that is because our mature economies, Europe, but also the US, is growing much slower than they did. Some of that is related to things that will be with us for a very long time. For example, labor supply is slowing. Populations are aging.
Yeah.
We have fewer people being added to the labor force. If you have fewer workers being
Especially
added to the labor
in the
force...
Western world.
Yes, that's in the mature economies. But when you look, you made the point about Asia. Even in Asia, these very rapid growth rates of the early 2000s aren't as fast anymore. Just think about China, where growth rates were double digit in the early 2000s, 10%, 11% sometimes. Today, we talk about 7%.
Yeah.
We actually think at the conference board it's lower than 7%. We don't trust the official numbers. So these growth rates in these Asian economies that are gradually becoming more mature, that cannot drive growth through more investment and more exports, but now have to serve consumers and services sectors who want more healthcare and better education. That's much more difficult to do. When you get closer to the frontier, and many of these companies in Asia, as many of you know, are getting much closer to the frontier. At the frontier, it's much harder to grow because you have to move the frontier out. You can't catch up, as we sometimes call it. So I think it is a reality as well that the growth of the global economy isn't as rapid as it was. But there is a good side to that too. A more mature economy also means better quality products and services, more sophisticated consumers, which is why consumer relationships become so much more important. So I think even in a slower economy, you can have a very successful business, provided that you move up higher into the value chain and don't take a race to the bottom where you can never win.
Yes, I think it's the question of the value chain is very important nowadays.
Yeah.
Presenting to your presentation in the Hellenic Management Association, the president, Mr. Lambrinopoulos, said that the main problem in Greece is trust. We have a problem of trust. And I see that trust in business is in the bottom of your survey. How do you explain this, this contradiction?
It is indeed a contradiction, because a couple of years ago we introduced trust in business into this survey. It wasn't there 5 years ago or so. And it was because CEOs, when we talked to them, they talked a lot about trust in business. Like the president of the Hellenic Management Association did yesterday. And so we said, okay, if this is important, trust in business, we'll add it to the survey and we'll see what you say. And then we added it to the survey and they rank it very low. So we went back to the CEOs. This is not just for Greece. Globally, it's very low. It's actually number 10 globally. We went back to them and we said, well, you say it's important, but why then don't you put it higher on the list? And the answer is basically this. They say, it is important, but trust in business is not a business goal. I cannot have a program around increasing trust in business. What I can do as a CEO is to walk the talk, is to show to my employees, to my customers, that I'm a trustworthy company, that I'm a trustworthy employer, that I invest in my employees, that I train them, that I give them opportunities to grow in my company, that I allow them to take part in the new exciting things that my company are doing, that I'm providing products and services to my customers that are honest, that are well priced, that have a good quality, that I am serious about sustainability, that it is not just something in my brand, but that I really live it, and that the company shows that it is more sustainable and environmental friendly. So that when you look at some of the strategies for some of the other challenges, that's where the trust in business comes in. It's something that's on your mind, but it's not like, let's create a little bit more trust in business today. It is about do the things that you do as a business executive every day, and just do them in a way that you feel your stakeholders are going to trust you more.
According to your conclusions in Greece and in the global world, What are the difference and the similarities between the Greek CEOs and the global CEOs?
Well, as I said, first of all, the good news is that Greek CEOs are not very different from global CEOs. They think the same way. They're optimistic, they're offensive, they try to go on the offense to really try to change things. So I think that's the good news. It's not like CEOs here are hunkering down because of the crisis. Having said that, it doesn't mean that it is very difficult here. It's very, very hard. And that is why, for example, we see that even though customer relationship and human capital are number 1 and 2 in Greece, the third one is still government regulation.
Yeah.
A year ago it was actually number 1, so it actually went down a little bit on the list, but still companies are struggling with the new regulatory environment that they have to deal with. A lot of things, when you talk to CEOs here, and I listen to them very carefully, they say we've done things in a particular way for a very long time and we really need to change. And that change is now forced upon us by the circumstances. We better make the best of it. But we have to now be more compliant to all these new regulations that come in. Again, it's part of a trust that people will have in your companies that will actually live up to what is expected from us. So I think that is still very, very specific about Greek CEOs. Financial instability is a much more important hot button issue than it is in other parts of the world.
It's a financial instability, but here in Greece also there is a tremendous problem now, and it's no new, of a liquidity problem also.
Of course. I mean,
and the credit problem for the companies.
Yeah.
And this situation influences the investments.
So the immediate urgency of liquidity is of course going to be very important, and the risk again is what we talked about earlier, is to go into a defensive mode to protect your company. And again, I mean, you have to do that. You have to make sure as a company that you are able to weather the storm. But at the same time, you also need to make sure that you're going to be at the right end of the stick, because the economy will begin to recover at some point. The important thing is that the economy in Greece was recovering in 2014. We saw some positive signs.
In macroeconomic
in macroeconomic terms, yes. That doesn't mean that it was easy for the people, but we were beginning to see some changes. We're now in sort of a new crisis, and we have to weather ourselves again for another storm that is coming over us that will make it even harder to deal with. The other thing I wanted to add in terms of sort of immediate sort of core issues, we found that corporate tax reform was an issue that Greek CEOs put up very high on the list, much higher than certainly Europe as a whole, but also higher in the US, where corporate tax reform is also a big issue. So I think it's one of those areas where we're now, of course, making big changes and where companies need to think hard about how they're going to comply to that.
You said that 15% of the companies are European companies. Have you any indications about their confidence in the Eurozone?
Well, financial instability as a concern is a concern across Europe, not just in Greece. European CEOs generally are worried about the very slow recovery in their domestic markets. But again, there is some recovery.
I mean, they believe that the Eurozone will be there for the coming years?
It's sort of interesting. Back in 2012...
Because there are several theories and several considerations about the Brexit and so on.
Yeah. Well, back in 2012, when we had the first sort of crisis around the euro, I think the concerns about an exit for Greece and the concerns about the disappearance of the euro were more intense than they are now. That doesn't mean that there is no risk, but I do think that most CEOs believe that the only way forward for Europe is to build a single market, not just in goods, but also in services, where we still have a lot of mileage to make, that there is no way that our economies can do this on their own, that we need to stick together and work ourselves through this very difficult period. But I don't think there's much appetite among CEOs anywhere in Europe to think that a fragmented Europe, of which a Greek exit could be the beginning, is something that will make them better off in the longer term. So it seems to me that people are worried about it. People are worried about the political dynamics that are not very favorable at the moment. But I think from an economic and from a financial point of view, I think most business leaders would think that's not the way to go. Not for Greece, but also not for the rest of Europe, because it can be the beginning of a fragmentation elsewhere in Europe. Think of an exit from Britain, which would be a real disaster for the European Union. Think about the potential impact it may have on a country like Spain that may also then have to consider an exit if they get a different government than they currently have. So I think overall there is concern, but there's also confidence that it will not happen because the economic and the financial interests that we have to stay together are so strong.
According to your view, what is the importance that the Greek CEOs give to the talent and to the human capital?
I think it's very important. In this environment where for many years we had to cut wages, we lost a lot of jobs, we still have unacceptably high unemployment, including youth unemployment, which is just not...
26%.
Which is something to cry about. It's very important that we keep focused on our workers, to train them, to engage them, to give them the skills so that they are prepared for a new future that is more competitive, for sure, where we'll have higher demands on our workers to be innovative, to be productive, to be part of a process of building better companies in Greece. You know, I think, and I said that in the conference that we had with the Hellenic Management Association, there is a crossroad here at the moment. Either we go down the hill in terms of what I call a race to the bottom, where we're going to compete on cost with lower wages and products and services at very low prices. We're going to compete with other countries in West Asia or in North Africa. Or we're going to go higher up into the value chain so that we can retain our competitiveness and become more competitive relative to our European partners in the United States and other mature economies. That obviously is the way to go. If we want to get back on a growth of living standards, we will get to a road where we have more productivity so that we can pay our people more, where we can engage them more so that they can be innovative, that people go to their job not just because they have to survive, but that they go to their job because they think it's an interesting way of spending their time and helping a company to build a product and service that people appreciate. So I think it's very important that CEOs think about human capital from that perspective and not just as a cost that I have to deal with on an annual basis. So it's really encouraging to see that. It's not easy. It's certainly not in this environment, but I think staying the course is probably the best way forward.
According to your view, the mobility of the talents, it's positive or negative for a country like Greece?
You mean the mobility around the world?
Yes.
Well, short term, of course, if there's a brain drain, so if we have the higher skilled people leave the country in search for other jobs and younger people...
According to some data, more or less 200,000 Greek talents left Greece.
Yes,
so
and we can't stop them. I mean, every young person who is skilled...
Especially in Europe, no, because there is the freedom of circulation.
And we can't blame them for looking for a better opportunity if they can't get it in their own country. So, again, what is very important is that CEOs see that they can build great companies, that can build companies that people want to be part of. I think, you know, on the whole, people want to be home where they're coming from, and they want to work for companies that are great companies. And I think we still have a lot of great companies in Greece. And I think if CEOs, again, remain focused on building human capital, think about products and services that our customers appreciate, young people will love to work for those kind of companies. That's the best way to keep them in the longer term. Again, it's not going to be easy because there's so many challenges around us. But I think stay the course, I think, is in the longer term the only way to actually build a healthy and a prosperous business sector in Greece.
Do you think that sustainability is a big challenge for the Greek companies and the global companies?
Well, it's actually...
Because I saw sustainability in the year 2011 was 8th, and now he's in the 5th place.
Yeah, it's interesting. Globally, it actually has gone up in importance, particularly in the case of Asia. We see a very rapid increase in the importance of sustainability. In Europe, but also in Greece, particularly in Greece, it's low, and it actually has lowered a little bit on the list. You know, I think to some extent it is the result of crisis and sometimes sustainability, which is not just, by the way, environment, but also social and government. I mean, in the light of crisis, it's sometimes seen as a luxury. But I think what we can learn from, for example, our Asian companies is that it is not a luxury, that it is actually an absolute need. And think about China. If you go to Beijing or to Shanghai, you can see why sustainability is going to be important if you are in these places where pollution is so bad.
It's very bad.
And it's terrible. And it shows that people do want to have products and services that are sustainable, that are green, that are, again, it goes back to customer relationships and corporate brand. So I don't think it's a luxury. But I understand that, in the light of the current crisis environment, it's perhaps not the top priority, but we shouldn't be complacent about it. I do think that customers are going to look for those products and services that have those sustainability characteristics.
Okay, Mr. Van Hack, thank you for this constructive discussion.
You're very welcome.
And I think that we will have the opportunity to have another discussion next year.
I'm really looking forward to that, and hopefully in a better environment then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, παρακολουθήσατε την εκπομπή «Δρόμοι της Ανάπτυξης» που σας προσφέρει η Ελληνική Εταιρεία Διοίκησης Επιχειρήσεων σε συνεργασία με το οικονομικό τηλεοπτικό κανάλι SBC. Σήμερα είχαμε μια πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα συζήτηση με τον κύριο Van Ark, που είναι αντιπρόεδρος του The Conference Board, ένας οργανισμός που σε συνεργασία με την ΕΕΔ πραγματοποιεί μια παγκόσμια έρευνα για τις αναμονές και τις συμπεριφορές των ηγετικών στελεχών των επιχειρήσεων. Σας ευχαριστώ για την προσοχή σας.